When your own siblings decide you're not worth the price of a plane ticket, you start to wonder if blood really means anything at all. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 31, the youngest daughter in a family that used to mean everything to me. I always believed we were close. We had our differences, sure, but I thought family arguments were just part of being human. That belief shattered the morning I opened my phone and saw a flood of photos in our group chat. There they were, Tessa, Grant, and Lyle, smiling in the snow, wrapped in matching scarves, holding mugs of hot chocolate in front of a fancy cabin in Colorado. My heart sank. I scrolled through the pictures again, hoping maybe I had missed an earlier message, something like, "Hey Mara, you should come too." But there was nothing. No text, no call, not even a heads up. The captions made it worse. Sibling trip of the year. Tessa had written, "Just us three," added Grant. I stared at those words until they blurred. My chest felt heavy, like someone had pressed all the air out of me. It wasn't just about the trip, it was the message behind it. They didn't forget me. They chose not to include me. I scrolled back through our older messages. Weeks before, I had mentioned wanting to take time off work, maybe go somewhere as a family. Tessa never replied. Grant made a joke about me always being busy. Lyle sent a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. I didn't realize then that they were already planning something without me. I set my phone down and just sat there on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. The apartment felt too quiet. For years, I'd been the one they leaned on, the one who handled the hard stuff when Mom was sick, the one who paid bills on time, the one who remembered birthdays. I thought that counted for something. Apparently it didn't. After a few minutes, the group chat buzzed again. More pictures. Lyle laughing in the snow, Tessa posing by a fireplace, Grant holding up a glass of wine. My stomach twisted. I didn't reply. I didn't even open the messages after that. It's strange how pain can turn into something else when you sit with it long enough. At first, I felt small, invisible. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how tired I was of chasing people who never met me halfway. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd stay quiet like always. But they were wrong. That day, something in me changed. I didn't cry for long. I didn't beg for an explanation. I just promised myself that if they could take a trip without me, I could live without them. They thought they had left me behind, but they had no idea what that moment would spark inside me. What started as heartbreak would soon turn into the best decision I ever made. After I saw those photos, I kept thinking back to all the times I had been there for my family. I was always the dependable one. When our mom got sick, I was the one who stayed by her side every night. I managed her medications, paid her bills, and made sure she had everything she needed. My siblings visited when it was convenient, posted pictures of her to look caring, and then went back to their own lives. I didn't mind back then. I told myself we all helped in our own way. But deep down, I knew I was the only one holding things together. After Mom passed, I handled everything: the funeral, the paperwork, the estate. Tessa was too emotionally drained. Grant was too busy with work, and Lyle said he didn't understand legal stuff. I did it all while trying to comfort them, even when no one thought to comfort me. For months, I thought maybe I was meant to be that person, the strong one who didn't need anything back. But the older I got, the more lonely that role became. Every holiday, they'd make plans without asking what worked for me. Every time I tried to bring up doing something as a group, they brushed it off. Tessa would say, "You're always too serious." Grant would joke, "Mara can handle herself." Lyle would just laugh awkwardly and change the subject. I started realizing that I wasn't really part of their world anymore. I was more like their backup plan when they needed something done. When I found out about that Colorado trip, it wasn't just the trip that hurt. It was everything behind it. It told me exactly how little I mattered to them. After sitting with that pain for a day, I finally texted the group chat. I didn't yell or accuse them. I just wrote, "Hey, I saw your trip photos. You guys didn't think to invite me?" For a long time, no one answered. Then Tessa replied, "It was kind of a last-minute thing, Mara. Just something for those who could afford it." Those words hit harder than I expected. I sat staring at them, feeling my face burn. Those who could afford it. I had been working 2 jobs for years to pay off Mom's medical bills. Bills they had promised to help with but never did. They knew why I didn't have extra money lying around. They used that as their excuse. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. For once, I didn't feel like defending myself or reminding them what I had done for them. I just stared at that message until the screen dimmed and set the phone down. Something in me went quiet that day. Not angry quiet, just calm, steady done. It was the first time I realized I didn't want to chase their love anymore. Something inside me had shifted, and I wasn't sure they'd ever notice until it was far too late. That night, I cried until my eyes hurt. I wasn't just sad about the trip anymore. I was tired. Tired of being the one they overlooked, tired of pretending it didn't bother me. For a long time, I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, wondering when I had stopped being part of my own family. The quiet in my apartment felt heavy, but after a while, that silence started to clear my head. I opened my laptop, not really sure what I was looking for. My bank account popped up on the screen, the savings I had built little by little over the years. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That money was supposed to be for someday. Someday when I had time. Someday when I had someone to go with. Someday when I felt like I deserved it. But sitting there that night, I realized someday was just an excuse. I was done waiting for people who never waited for me. I started searching flights without thinking too hard. I didn't want beaches or big cities. I wanted peace, somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't remind me of anyone. Maine caught my eye. I'd seen pictures of rocky coasts, lighthouses, and calm harbors. It looked simple and calm, exactly what I needed. When I clicked on the flight options, my hand hovered over the business class seat. I had never flown anything close to that before. My siblings always joked that I was cheap, that I didn't know how to enjoy life. Maybe that's why I clicked it. Not out of anger, but because for once I wanted to do something just for me. I didn't tell anyone. No post, no text, no group chat. I packed a small bag and kept it to myself. The morning of the flight, I woke up early. I made coffee, looked around my apartment, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, calm. No one was waiting on me, and I wasn't waiting for anyone either. When I got to the airport, I half expected to feel nervous, but instead I felt light. I handed my ticket to the flight attendant and walked down the aisle, taking in the wide seat, the soft blanket, the quiet hum of the cabin. As the plane began to move, I looked out the window. The city below started to shrink, and I realized I wasn't running away. I was finally letting go. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about who needed me or who had forgotten me. I was just thinking about the sky ahead and the feeling of starting over. When the wheels lifted off the ground, I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. I didn't know what waited for me in Maine, but for the first time, I felt free, truly free. The air in Maine felt different, softer somehow. When I stepped off the plane, the smell of salt and cold wind wrapped around me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to hurry anywhere. I didn't have anyone to meet or anything to prove. I just wanted to exist. I rented a small room above a bakery in a quiet coastal town. From my window, I could see the ocean stretching out like a sheet of gray glass. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of seagulls and the smell of bread baking downstairs. I didn't make plans, I just walked. The streets were lined with tiny shops and old houses with chipped paint. People said good morning to me even though they didn't know my name. It was simple and kind, something I had forgotten life could be. On my second day, I found a little bookstore tucked between a cafe and an antique shop. It looked old, with a crooked sign and dusty windows. I went inside and was greeted by a man rearranging a stack of books. He looked up and smiled. "You look like someone who actually reads them," he said. His name was Noah. Noah was quiet, with a calm way of talking that made people slow down. He told me he had owned the store for 20 years. His wife had passed a few years ago, and since then, the store had been both his job and his way of staying connected to people. I didn't tell him much about my life, but somehow, he seemed to understand more than I said. Every afternoon, I found myself stopping by. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd just sit in silence while I read by the window. One day, he handed me a worn-out novel and said, "People forget that stories can fix things that medicine can't." I smiled, not because I fully believed it, but because I wanted to. In the evenings, I'd walk by the docks and buy lobster rolls from a small stand that only took cash. I'd eat sitting on the pier, watching the water change colors as the sun went down. For the first time, food tasted different, richer, warmer, real. I laughed with strangers who didn't care where I came from, and I found myself laughing freely, without that heavy weight sitting on my chest. My phone buzzed a few times, messages from my siblings. I didn't open them. Not out of anger, but because I finally realized I didn't owe them my attention. Silence became my quiet revenge. The days passed slowly but peacefully. I wasn't trying to show anyone how strong I was. I was just living. The more I let go of the hurt, the lighter I felt. By the end of the week, I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I had changed completely, but because I finally looked like someone who had started to heal. When I got back home, everything felt a little different. My apartment looked the same, but I didn't feel like the same person walking into it. I unpacked slowly, still thinking about the ocean air, the sound of waves, and the quiet peace I had found. A few days later, my sister Tessa called. She said they were having a small family dinner, and that I should come. Her voice was overly cheerful, like nothing had happened. I hesitated, but I went. Not for them, for myself. I wanted to see them, to see if anything in me still cared as much as before. The dinner was at Tessa's house. She lived in a big, spotless home that always felt more like a showroom than a place people actually lived in. When I walked in, they were already laughing at the table. Grant was pouring wine, Lal was showing pictures from their trip again. They barely paused when I came through the door. "Oh hey, Mara," Grant said, smiling like everything was fine. "You wouldn't believe how amazing the mountains were." Tessa nodded, her voice dripping with pride. "We went skiing every morning. It was such a great trip. We really needed that time together." I sat down and just listened for a while. They didn't ask how I'd been or what I'd been up to. They just kept talking about themselves. I let them. Then, while they were describing some fancy restaurant in Colorado, I quietly said, "That sounds nice. I just got back from Maine." The table went silent for a second. Tessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Maine?" she asked, her tone sharp with surprise. "You went on a trip?" I nodded. "Yeah. I took some time off work. Needed a change of scenery." Grant laughed lightly. "Oh, so you finally took that little vacation you always talk about. How was it? Long flight?" "It was," I said, smiling. "But business class made it comfortable." The air shifted. Tessa blinked. "Wait, you flew business class?" "Yes," I said simply. "It was incredible." The silence that followed was almost funny. Grant's face tightened a little, and Lyle looked down at his plate. Tessa forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Wow," she said. "That's fancy." Grant finally muttered. "Seems like a waste of money just to prove a point." I looked at him and smiled softly. "Not everything has to be a point, Grant. Sometimes it's just about doing something because you can." No one said much after that. The noise in the room faded. For the first time in my life, they didn't talk over me or make jokes at my expense. They just looked uncomfortable, maybe even a little unsure. I didn't feel angry or proud. I just felt free, sitting there calmly, knowing that they finally saw me differently. They had no idea how much that small moment had changed everything. After that dinner, word about my trip started to spread through the family. I didn't talk about it much, but somehow, everyone found out. Maybe it was Tessa who mentioned it to make herself feel better, or maybe one of my cousins overheard something. Either way, it didn't stay quiet for long. A week later, my Aunt Claire called me. She was always the one who saw through things, the one who noticed what others ignored. "I heard you took a trip by yourself," she said. "Good for you, sweetheart. It's about time you did something for you." Her voice was warm, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to explain or defend myself. I just said, "Thank you," and meant it. Then came a call I didn't expect. My dad. We hadn't talked much in years. He and Mom had divorced long before she got sick, and after that, he drifted away. But he still heard things through the family grapevine. "Your aunt told me what happened," he said. "Sounds like your brother and sisters treated you like dirt." His tone was sharp. "They've always been selfish, Mara. You were the only one who ever had any backbone." Hearing that from him was strange. I didn't need his approval, but part of me felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. I didn't want to talk badly about my siblings, so I just said, "It's fine, Dad. I'm doing okay now." But it wasn't fine for them. Tessa started acting strange. She began posting little digs online, quotes about people who play the victim, and those who think money makes them better. It was childish, but it was clear who she was talking about. When I didn't react, she grew colder. Every time we spoke, her tone had a sharp edge, like she was trying to make me feel guilty for something I hadn't done. Grant became defensive. He called one evening, pretending to check in. "Look," he said, "Tessa's being dramatic, but you have to admit you kind of made it look like you were showing off. Flying business class, really?" I could hear the irritation behind his words. I didn't argue. "Grant," I said calmly, "I didn't do anything to show off. I just made a choice for myself. That's all." He went quiet, then mumbled something about being busy and hung up. Lau was the only one who handled it differently. A few days later, he texted me late at night. "Hey, I'm sorry," he wrote. "About the trip. About all of it. You didn't deserve that." It wasn't much, but it was honest. I told him I appreciated it. The three of them started drifting apart after that. They used to be a tight little group, always on the same side, but not anymore. Tessa stopped answering Grant's calls. Lyle avoided family dinners. The balance they had built, the one that left me out, started to crack. I didn't feel joy watching it happen. I just felt calm. For once, I wasn't the one holding the family together, and it felt like freedom. I didn't need to argue or prove anything anymore. The truth was doing that on its own. A few months passed, and life settled into a quiet rhythm. I worked, cooked simple meals, and spent weekends walking through the park near my apartment. I didn't hear much from my siblings, which was fine by me. But then one evening my phone rang. It was Aunt Claire again, her voice low and serious. "Your father isn't doing well, Mara," she said. "He's been in and out of the hospital. Someone needs to take charge." I hadn't spoken to Dad in months since that short call, but I didn't think twice. The next morning, I drove to the hospital. When I walked into his room, he looked smaller, weaker. The man who had once seemed so stubborn now looked tired. I pulled a chair next to his bed and stayed. I helped the nurses, spoke to the doctors, filled out forms. It all came naturally to me. It always did. Days passed before my siblings showed up. Tessa arrived first, wearing expensive clothes and a worried expression that looked more like an act. Grant came later, already complaining about work. Lyle followed quietly, uncomfortable but kind. For a moment, seeing them all together like that brought back a familiar ache. We were supposed to be a family, yet everything between us felt broken and hollow. When the doctor explained that Dad would need care after leaving the hospital, the room fell silent. Then, as expected, the arguing began. Grant said he couldn't afford it. Tessa said she was too busy managing her kids' schedules. Lyle offered to help but didn't have much to give. I stood there listening, realizing how familiar it all was. It was just like when Mom was sick, me doing everything while they made excuses. Back then, I had thought it was my duty, that being dependable meant carrying everyone's weight. But now, I saw it for what it was. I wasn't weak for caring too much. I was strong for surviving despite them. I had always been the one keeping things from falling apart. When the conversation turned to money, Tessa looked straight at me. "You've always been good with finances," she said sweetly. "Maybe you can cover the bills this time? I'll pay you back later." Her voice was smooth, fake, and full of expectation. I felt a strange calm wash over me. I looked at her and said quietly, "You planned a trip without me. You can handle a hospital bill without me." The words hung in the air like a door closing. Tessa's face tightened. Grant shifted uncomfortably, and Lyle stared at the floor. No one spoke after that. I gathered my things and walked out of the room. I didn't feel angry or proud, just done. That was the moment I finally understood something. The trip they took without me wasn't just betrayal. It had been my release. The pain I felt back then had been the start of my freedom. And now, standing in that hospital hallway, I finally stepped into it fully. It was a quiet evening when I heard the knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I almost didn't open it, but something told me I should. When I did, Tessa was standing there, arms crossed, her face stiff like she was holding herself together. She looked different, not softer, just more tired. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she said, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit down right away, just looked around the room like she was searching for something to criticize, but couldn't find it. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I didn't plan on saying this," she began, her voice careful and cold. "But I think we should clear the air." I said nothing. I just waited. She looked down at her hands and forced a small smile. "I guess I owe you an apology," she said. "Things got weird between us. The trip, Dad, everything. I didn't mean for you to feel left out. We just thought it would be easier at the time. But maybe we could move past it now. For the family." Her words sounded practiced, like she'd been repeating them in her head before coming over. It wasn't regret. It was something else, maybe shame, maybe pride. I could tell she wasn't here because she missed me. She was here because the story of what she did had started to make her look bad. I looked at her and asked quietly, "Why now, Tessa?" She hesitated. "Because it's exhausting, all this tension. We used to be close." I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Close? You went on a trip without me. You lied about it. You made me feel small for years, and now that people see it, you want to pretend it didn't happen." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "You're being dramatic," she said quickly, her old tone slipping through. "It's family stuff. Families fight. Families do fight," I said softly, "but they also care enough to fix things." I stood up, walked over to the door, and faced her. "I'm not angry anymore, Tessa. I just don't need to be part of something that hurts me." The words came out calm, steady, and final. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. For once, she didn't have a comeback. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us heavy and sharp. Then I opened the door. She looked at me, maybe waiting for me to change my mind, but I didn't. She walked out without saying another word. I closed the door behind her. Not hard, just firmly, enough to let the moment end. The apartment was quiet again, but this time it felt peaceful. It was the first time I truly felt like I had closed that part of my life for good. After Tessa left that night, the quiet in my apartment felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I didn't have to fix anything or pretend everything was okay. I could finally think about what I wanted, not what everyone else expected from me. A few weeks later, I drove out to see my mother's old house. It had been sitting empty for years, filled with boxes of memories and the kind of silence that holds both comfort and pain. I walked through the rooms, running my hand along the walls. It was the place where I had grown up, where I had taken care of her, and where I had learned how strong I could be. But it was also the place where I had lost myself trying to keep everyone else together. I stood in the living room for a long time before finally saying out loud, "It's time to let go." A month later, I sold the house. The decision felt big, but it also felt right. I used the money to move to a small coastal town in Maine, the same one where I had taken my trip. It felt like the only place that truly understood me. I found a small apartment near the water. Nothing fancy, but it had sunlight, quiet, and a view of the sea. That was all I needed. Noah was still there, running his little bookstore. When he heard I'd moved nearby, he showed up with a cup of coffee and a stack of old art books. "Thought you could use a little inspiration," he said with that same gentle smile. I told him about my idea, something I'd dreamed of for years but never had the courage to start. I wanted to open a small creative studio where people could paint, write, or just sit quietly and breathe. He loved the idea and helped me find a cheap space above the bookstore. Together, we fixed it up. New paint, simple furniture, big windows that opened to the smell of salt air. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first few weeks felt strange. I wasn't used to peace. I'd wake up early and listen to the waves, make coffee, and sit in silence. Sometimes I'd feel the urge to check my phone, to see if my siblings had texted. They did every now and then. Group messages about holidays, random updates, photos of their kids. I read them but rarely replied. My silence said more than any words could. Every evening, I'd walk along the shore and feel the wind on my face. It reminded me that walking away hadn't been losing. It had been choosing myself, choosing calm, choosing peace, choosing to start again. And for the first time in my life, that choice felt like love. A year passed faster than I expected. My days in the coastal town had become simple and calm. The studio was doing well, and I had met people who cared about me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I smiled more often, slept better, and felt lighter. I didn't realize how much I had changed until I got an invitation in the mail. A family gathering at my aunt's house. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, but something inside me said to go. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted to see them from where I stood now, a place of peace. When I arrived, the house was full of people. My cousins greeted me warmly, my aunt gave me a long hug, and I could see my siblings across the room. Tessa, Grant, and Lyle stood together, but they didn't look as close as they used to. There was tension in their smiles, like something between them had cracked. Tessa spotted me first. Her face froze for a second before she forced a polite smile. "Mara," she said, walking over in heels that clicked too loudly on the floor. "You came." "I did," I said, smiling back. "How have you been?" She shrugged. "Busy. You know how life is." Her tone was flat, her confidence thinner than I remembered. Grant joined us, his voice softer than usual. "Heard you moved to Maine," he said. "Looks peaceful there." "It is," I said. "Very peaceful." They all looked at me quietly, as if trying to read something in my face. Maybe they expected bitterness or coldness, but I didn't feel either. I felt calm, like I had nothing left to prove. After a while, as people started eating and chatting, Tessa leaned toward me. Her voice was quieter now. Would you ever want to take a trip together again? Like old times. I looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger in me, no desire to hurt her. Just truth. I smiled gently and said, I already did, just not with you. She blinked, and for once, she didn't have a response. Grant shifted uncomfortably, and Lyle looked down, ashamed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward for me, only for them. They finally saw what I had learned long ago. I didn't need them to feel whole. Later that night, as I left the party, I looked back at the house one last time. They were still inside, smiling for pictures, pretending everything was fine. But I could see it, the cracks between them, the distance that had grown. The next morning, I packed my suitcase again. This time, I wasn't escaping or proving anything. I was just traveling because I wanted to. When I boarded the plane and settled into my business class seat, I looked out the window and smiled. I wasn't chasing peace anymore. I was already living it. Do you think Mara made the right choice by walking away from her family and finally choosing herself? Or should she have given her siblings another chance to make things right? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your opinion. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned for more real-life stories that'll keep you thinking long after they end.